this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB project.
Commençons par mes parents. Papa, maman. Voilà mon père et ma mère.
The question: how to teach French more effectively? This was the challenge undertaken by master teacher Pierre Capretz and his teaching team, along with the television producers of WGBH Boston. The result of their efforts is this 52-program series called French in Action, a multimedia course that opens a new era in language learning. The basic principle of the course is immersion, a process by which students are thrown into a French-speaking world from the very start.
It was frightening at first, but I think after a few lessons, when you understood the way things were going to be handled, and you got used to it, it became a little less intimidating.
We talked with Beatrice Abetti, coordinator of the French in Action project.
The difference between immersion technique and, if you want, a more traditional technique is that instead of giving French word by word, if you want, bit by bit, or, you know, spoon-feeding the students in a way, we plunge them, we throw them into a swimming pool of French.
I think the most valuable part of the course is that you sort of learn all of French at once.
Well, the first day of the class, the professor came in speaking French, and from day one, we spoke French. And as far as conversation went, we were sort of thrust into a situation speaking French from the beginning, and it was a faster way of learning a language than I'd known previously.
In this course, we learn it sort of all at the same time, which works out really well.
I've taken other languages in the past, and I learned the alphabet for 2 weeks, and how to say table and chair, and then parts of the body, and you can't say anything. And with the French class that I took here, it was more what was going on in life.
Ah, te voilà, tu tombes bien. Viens m'aider.
Oh,
Allez.
French in Action shows what is going on in French life by presenting actual cultural documents, like interviews with people on the street.
Comment vous appelez-vous?
Je m'appelle France.
Et vous, comment vous appelez-vous?
Jacqueline. Je m'appelle Jacqueline.
Et vous?
Et moi, c'est Nicole.
Est-ce que je peux vous demander quel âge vous avez?
Devinez.
Quel est ton prénom?
Olivier.
Et quel âge tu as?
12 ans.
Tu vas à l'école?
Ben oui, malheureusement.
À quelle école tu vas?
Au lycée Buffon.
Tu es dans quelle classe?
En 5e.
Comment vous appelez-vous?
Je m'appelle Hervé.
Hervé comment?
Hervé Meunier.
Quel âge avez-vous?
J'ai 20 ans.
Vous appelez comment, madame?
Madame Vangela.
Vous habitez à Paris?
J-E-U-L-I-N. Gela.
Vous habitez à Paris?
Évidemment, c'est le 5e arrondissement. C'est Paris, puisque j'habite là.
Il y a longtemps que vous êtes à Paris?
Oh, ça fait 35 ans, monsieur. Mais je suis une vieille parisienne, moi. 35 ans. Je suis née au Pré Saint-Gervais.
Vous avez habité toujours à Paris?
J'ai toujours habité Paris.
These interviews are used to illustrate specific words, such as fatigué. Here the elderly woman says she is 85 years old and that she's tired.
J'ai 85 ans. Alors je suis fatiguée.
Excerpts from French films and TV series are used in the same way. In this scene, a woman is explaining that her husband's driving makes her sick, illustrating the word malade.
Je me sens pas bien, je suis malade.
Et moi aussi, je suis malade.
This excerpt from a TV ad for a restaurant in Paris is used to illustrate the word manger. Not to mention such basic notions as interest, expectation, contact, disappointment, sadness, compassion, consolation, anxiety, relief.
au bistrot de la gare. Les femmes qui ont du goût, les hommes qui ont de la chance.
In this ad for milk, the central characters help viewers understand the expression pas pressé. Obviously, these cows are in no particular hurry.
Pour avoir du bon lait tous les jours, pas la peine d'avoir sa vache. Il y a Lactel. Lactel, les mamelles de la France.
These programs also draw from well-known French cartoonists. Jean-Jacques Sempé, Jean Bellus, Jean Eiffel, Serre, Debout. These graphic artists express a particularly French sense of humor and view of the world that Americans may find unusual. French humor, like the French language, is basically untranslatable and can only be understood from inside the French cultural system. That is the goal of French in Action. To achieve this goal, French in Action systematically avoids translation.
Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille.
Ça va?
Ça va.
Au revoir.
Au revoir, mademoiselle.
Vous voyez? Elle parle français.
No English is ever spoken. Only the everyday language of the French people.
Bonjour. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Où est-ce que tu vas?
When you walk into the first class and you view the first video, it's very intimidating and frustrating because you have no English to use.
Students do get angry and frustrated, especially at the beginning.
So it was kind of like a challenge to conquer.
For a few weeks they might be uncomfortable because there is so much French thrown at them and they only understand the gist of it, but that's fine, that's what we want.
I like the fact that there is a barrage of French aimed at the student. I like a course which is a challenge.
It was fun because when they were speaking French right away, you felt like you were really going to learn something. You knew you'd have to be immersed in it right away. And you knew it'd be hard, but it would be a neat experience.
We talked with Pierre Capretz about the absence of English and about how you make sense of what you hear.
In this course, we throw lots of French at the students, and only French. We don't use English. We don't translate. Why? Well, because French is not a translation of English. It is not English that has been coded into French. No, French is French. It is not a code of English. So that you cannot just replace a French word with an English word. It does not really work. When French people say something in French, it is not that they really mean something in English, but say it in French because they don't know better or to show off or out of perversity. No. When they say something in French, they mean something French. So, to understand what a French word means, what you have to do is observe the circumstances in which it is used. That's what will tell you what that word means. Take bonjour, for example.
Bonjour.
What does it mean?
Bonjour.
Good day, hello,
Bonjour.
hi,
Bonjour.
good morning?
Bonjour.
Well, not exactly. But take a look at this.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, Madame Lutilleul.
Bonjour, monsieur. Bonjour.
Bonjour, mademoiselle Bello.
Bonjour, monsieur.
You see that bonjour is something French people say when they meet someone. That's the meaning of bonjour, the circumstances in which it is used. Now, note that there are words that are used in different kinds of circumstances. Salut, for example. Watch how it is used here.
Véronique, salut.
Salut.
Salut. Salut, cobaye.
You see that salut is something you say when you meet someone. But now, watch this.
Salut.
Allez, salut.
Salut. Salut. Toi. Salut.
You see that salut is also something you say when you are leaving.
Salut.
Salut.
In this course, we do not translate words, but we show them used in a number of situations so that students can figure out what they mean through observation and deduction. Here's the way it works. You see the teacher on the first day of the French class announcing, "Nous allons apprendre le français." Then you see a child learning how to read, and you hear, "Il apprend à lire." Then you see a little girl studying her lessons, and you hear, "Elle apprend ses leçons." Then you see her learning how to knit, and you hear, "Elle apprend à tricoter." You see a young woman who's learning how to play the guitar, and you hear, "Elle apprend à jouer de la guitare." You see a man learning how to swim, and you hear, "Il apprend à nager." By then, you begin to suspect that this word apprendre, apprend, has something to do with the notion of learning. Let's take another example. You see someone in a hurry, and you hear pressé. Then you see someone who is not in a hurry, and you hear pas pressé. You compare the two, and you get a notion that pressé, pas pressé, has something to do with being in a hurry or not being in a hurry. Or else you see a young woman who is sick in bed, and you hear, "Elle est malade." You see other people who look sick, and you hear, "Malade, malade, malade, malade." Then you see a young woman who does not look sick at all, and you hear, "Pas malade." You get an idea that malade, pas malade must have something to do with being sick or not being sick. We don't have to tell you. You figured it out by yourself, progressively, in a natural way. All you have to do is to observe, to listen, and to put two and two together. Now, if you don't understand everything the first time around, it's all right. It's perfectly natural. It will come progressively.
French in Action presents French through a continuing story. A light, almost fanciful tale about Robert, a young American who meets a French woman, Mireille, her impish sister, Marie-Laure, her uncle Guillaume, her aunt Georgette, her friends Colette, Hubert, a young man who plays his role as a nobleman to the hilt, Jean-Pierre, a chance acquaintance, and dozens of other French people from all walks of life.
Allez, prends-moi ma place.
Even though the details of the story are true to life, it's not meant to be taken seriously.
You really see the grammar used in action as opposed to just learning it in a boring, dry lesson.
We talked with Barry Lidgate about the role of the story in the course.
The drama on which this whole course is based is a wonderful feature of the course in two ways. First of all, it is motivational. It's the students' way of getting access to the culture, of understanding the characters, of finding out about French life and language.
The situations were very real, and it was a light-hearted kind of story that was easily remembered, and it was a good vehicle, I thought.
This course gives you access to a tremendously vital and exciting and creative culture. And it's important to see it as such, and it's important also to have fun, to relax, to sit back, to enjoy the course. It's full of some wonderful images, it's full of some wonderful characters, it's full of some wonderful language.
The storyline allows for a great deal of exposure to authentic French.
On s'occupe de vous.
But it is important that students not try to assimilate everything they hear.
We tell them right away that they're not supposed to understand every word that we say, but they are supposed to get a global understanding of what we present to them.
Each of the 52 lessons starts with an episode of the continuing story.
Oh, moi, ça ne va pas bien. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? C'est malade? Non, je ne suis pas malade. Ça ne va pas fort, je suis fatiguée.
The second part of each lesson clarifies and illustrates the dialogue of the story.
Elle est fatiguée. Elle aussi, elle est fatiguée. Elle est fatiguée. Elle est fatiguée. Il est fatigué. Il est fatigué. Il est fatigué. Je suis fatigué. Fatigué. Georgette aussi est fatiguée.
Je suis fatiguée.
Elle est fatiguée. Écoutez.
One of the main features of the course is that it involves students in hearing the language before they see it in writing.
The course presents the language orally before it presents it in writing, or before it asks students to read and write actively, for a very good reason. French and English are written using the same alphabet, but the ways in which sounds are represented in French is different from the ways in which they're represented in English. And it's important for students to hear the sound before they try to reproduce it from a written representation. If you take, for instance, the French word comment, which is written C-O-M-M-E-N-T, speakers of English will look at that instinctively through the prism of their own writing system and say comment, when in fact the French word is pronounced comment and means something totally different.
An essential activity for the students is to imitate what they see and hear. They should watch closely and repeat, either to themselves or, better yet, write out loud.
Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille. Ça va? Ça va. Au revoir. Au revoir, mademoiselle.
In every program, there's a point where students can take the part of one of the characters. Here's how it works. Students see an exchange between two characters. For example, between Mireille and Madame Rosa.
Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille. Ça va? Ça va. Au revoir. Au revoir, mademoiselle. Vous voyez? Elle parle français.
The exchange is repeated.
Bonjour, Madame Rosa.
Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille.
Ça va?
Ça va.
Au revoir.
Au revoir, mademoiselle.
Then Madame Rosa's line is heard twice,
Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille. Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille.
followed by a freeze frame to give students a chance to repeat.
Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille. Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille.
When they come across an interactive segment, students should try, if possible, to repeat when they're given time to do so. They should speak out. They shouldn't be bashful about this. It's very important to say it straight out as loud as you can, as though you were talking to somebody halfway across the room.
It felt silly at first to be talking back to a tape. And I would oftentimes look around me and think, who's listening? And the only thing that's important is that I'm learning something.
After viewing the program, students should work with the French in Action audio cassettes. This allows them to practice the dialogue of the story by repeating
Comment ça va?
Comment ça va?
and answering.
Comment va Hubert? Pas mal. Pas mal. Pas mal.
Je vais à la fac. Et toi?
Je vais à la fac. Et toi?
Next, they should turn to the textbook, which contains the text of the story, with illustrations that recall the meaning of important new words. Then students should work with the audio cassettes and the exercises in the workbook. At the end of each lesson, students are invited to exercise their imagination by recombining what they've learned into a new version of the story. Learners working by themselves can do the reinvention of the story using elements printed in a grid at the end of each workbook lesson, selecting and recombining the phrases they see to create a new storyline or new dialogue.
Jack, comment vas-tu? Pas trop bien. Tu es malade? Oui, je suis malade. Fido aussi est malade. Où vas-tu? Je vais à la Bibli. Au revoir.
Students who are able to work with partners can act out their reinvention. For example, after watching these scenes,
Bonjour, Madame Rosa. Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille. Ça va? Ça va. Au revoir. Au revoir, mademoiselle.
Bonjour, ma petite Mireille. Comment vas-tu? Ça va, merci, et toi, ça va? Oh, moi, ça ne va pas bien. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a, ça ne va pas? Tu es malade? Non, je ne suis pas malade. Ça ne va pas fort, je suis fatiguée.
Students can have some fun, combining them into a new dialogue, like this one.
Here we go, you ready?
Right.
Tiens, bonjour Madame Rosa.
Bonjour, mademoiselle Mireille, ça va?
Non, ça ne va pas.
Ça ne va pas? Vous êtes malade?
Non, je ne suis pas malade, mais je suis pressée.
Ah, vous allez à la fac?
Non, je ne vais pas à la fac, je vais à Tahiti. Salut.
Au revoir, mademoiselle Mireille.
It's important to remember as you learn French to imitate the gestures as well as the words, because we communicate not just with words but with our whole bodies. Lawrence Wiley, Douglas Dillon Professor of the Civilization of France Emeritus at Harvard University, explains.
The longer I've taught French during a long life, the more I've realized that communication doesn't come just through words, it comes from the whole body. And I've gotten more and more interested in that, and I think it's terribly important in learning to communicate with French. Take, for instance, the first scene you're going to see. It shows Mireille Bello coming out of her apartment house, coming around the corner fast because she's on her way to an Italian class and she's late. And there's her best friend sitting at a cafe with 3 or 4 other people. So, of course, she stops and shakes hands with every one of them and gives her friend a kiss. But she has to run right on, so what does she do? She shakes hands with them all again. That seems very strange to Americans, but it's very important to maintain a relationship with French people to learn this kind of thing. People vary in their need to speak with different parts of their body. Jean-Pierre is that kind of person who cannot utter anything without putting his whole self with it. But the way he uses his body is very stylized. That is, he uses all the gestures that other people do, but he just uses more. For instance, when they ask him if he's going to be a doctor or something like that, he goes, no way in English, in French. Robert was walking around Paris for the first time. Strange things happen. He sees a bunch of students yelling and shouting and walking with banners and so on. He wonders what it's all about. Well, just then, a young man, his age, is crossing the street, so he stops him. It's Jean-Pierre. He said, what's going on here? And Jean-Pierre turns to him and shrugs his shoulders with a real French shrug. They shrug the way Americans don't shrug. Robert is hungry. He stops to order a croque monsieur. To pay for it, he pulls out his wallet and gives a 500 franc note. 500 francs, that's $100 to pay for this little sandwich. And the man at the counter looks up toward the skies, you know, attesting. What an awful situation he is in. Oh la la.
Oh la la, 500 francs.
The great advantage that you have now that I didn't have when I was learning French in an old Fraser and Square grammar where there's only conjugations and so on, is you can actually see people behaving and see their bodies moving, and see their bodies moving in time with their voice. And if you really pay attention to this and get into that rhythm, you're going to learn to speak French. You're going to learn to communicate far better than I did when I had a chance to learn conjugations.
As you learn to communicate in French with French in action, remember that in each lesson you will hear a great deal of French. But you are expected to understand at first only part of what you hear, and to use an even smaller part. Your ability to understand and speak French will improve steadily if you remember the rules of the game. Observe. Imitate. Speak up.
Où est-ce qu'elle va? Elle va à la fac.
And practice.
I don't think that I could have achieved any level of French proficiency if I hadn't practiced. I took it upon myself to at least part of each day, either if I was jogging or talking to my cat, to try and do it in French.
Do it on a consistent basis. Not study French every other day, but study French every day, maybe for less time, but consistently.
Learning a language is like preparing a piano concert or painting a picture or sculpting a sculpture. You can't compress experience. You can't expect to let it slide for 5 or 6 days and then at the end to cram for an exam or an exercise of that sort.
The practice was the essential thing.
The build-up is gradual, but there is very quickly, actually, incredible comprehension.
I got a lot of fun out of doing it.
I was in France and Switzerland for a while, and I made a lot of friends there that I promised I would write back in French as soon as I could.
I have a friend in Switzerland who's pretty impressed with the fact that when it was after just a year, I was able to hold a reasonable conversation with her with more than just elementary vocabulary.
I think that if I went to a French-speaking country, I'd do all right now.
French in Action gives students access to hundreds of French-speaking people, thousands of true-to-life situations. Millions of individual images of contemporary France. The result is a tool for communicating in French that is both sophisticated and up-to-date. Above all, French in Action gives learners an overview of the culture of France, past and present. This cultural insight is what makes the study of French truly effective and fun.
Funding for this program was provided by the Annenberg CPB project.
Additional funding was provided by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Florence J. Gould Foundation Incorporated, le Ministère des Affaires étrangères, le Ministère de la Culture et de la Communication, le Commissariat général à la langue française, the Jesse B. Cox Charitable Trust, and the National Endowment for the Humanities.
You can order these programs on video cassette and our print and audio materials. Talk to us. The Annenberg CPB Projects, www.learner.org, 1-800-LEARNER.